Growing Up Weird.
Hi, welcome to Growing Up Weird with Gwen Bradbury and me, Greg Dickens. This is a podcast in which I interview Gwen Bradbury, the author of Growing Up Weird and the writer of the Substack of articles under the same name. We'll be discussing how the Western way that we raise children affects their long-term health and development. And by long-term, we mean up to like 100 years old. This is long-term stuff. Every week, we talk about some of the very recent news in this topic, in this field, and we go into depth on one of the article topics that have been written before or will be written in the future. This week, Gwen, what's our topic?
This week is an allergy special, Greg. We're going to be talking allergies, why they develop, why they're so common, and how we can reduce the risk for our children.
Nice, a big one, a really big one. Okay, well, before we get into that, do you mind if we plough into some news?
No, let's talk about some news. But, folks, we've got a certain flavour of news today, as it's the allergy special. We're talking about two topics that were presented at a recent really big allergy conference in the US. Greg, do you want to go first?
I do. I first want to point out the acronym, though, because AAAI is not an easy thing to say. And it makes all tech bros think that it's about artificial intelligence, which it's not. Gwen, top of your head, AAAI?
American Academy for Allergy, Asthma and Immunology, I think.
Wait, so it's 4 A's?
I think it's 4 A's and then an I.
I was so close to pronouncing it right. All right, fine. I'll go first. One of the abstracts that was discussed at the conference was by a group led by Sion Ma, a doctor based in the US, who was looking at neighbourhood conditions, air quality conditions. The abstract is entitled, Neighbourhood Conditions are major determinants of the early life upper airway microbiome across diverse regions and cohorts.
Upper airway microbiome. I still just have to take a moment on that because when we trained like at vet school,
your lungs are clean, aren't they?
Yeah, I thought the microbiome was just about cattle. But okay, tell me more. Upper airway microbiome.
I think nowadays it's pretty fair to say that bacteria are everywhere. We are but kind of walking environments. We're a walking ecosystem. Everybody knows about the gut microbiome. Yeah, we have bacteria, fungi, viruses, protoxistins, all sorts living in our guts. Turns out, every other surface we got is covered in bacteria too. The eye, the inside of the bladder, the skin, obviously, and the lungs. And the upper airways, so, your trachea, tracheoles, bronchi, etc. What this paper was saying is that you increase the diversity of the bacteria, etc., living in your lungs if you come from a more polluted neighbourhood.
Isn't diversity a good thing, though?
Okay, so you sound like you're reading a script from a DEI manuscript, which more people should be. Now that Trump is in power, I feel like more people should be paying attention to diversity, but that is, in this particular case, not true.
Huh.
In your gut, you are absolutely right. The more diversity, the better. And that is because of... Well, let me quote somebody directly. Dr. Caitlin Cowan, who is part of the microbiome group in Ireland, was recently asked the exact same thing. Isn't diversity always a good thing? It seems that there are certain parts of the human body that are better suited to more or less diversity. We might want high diversity in our gut microbiome, but in other body parts, like on our skin or in our eyes, the same diversity would indicate disease. Right, she goes on to say that in the gut, you have a whole bunch of crevices, you have a whole bunch of different pH levels, you have a whole bunch of either very digested or partially digested or undigested food, different chemical components, etc. And to deal with that, you need a very diverse microbiome. But somewhere like the eye, where you have the exact same chemical input all day, every day, you have a little bit more, a little bit less wind, and you have the exact same temperature all the time, you really don't need diversity. What you need is a couple, maybe 3, 4, 5 major players and a few bit players. If you have more than that, it indicates that something's going wrong. There are chemicals coming in that shouldn't be there. There are processes going on that shouldn't be happening. And the same's true in most areas of the skin, and the same turns out to be true in the lungs. So, if you sample from diseased lungs, you are more likely to find a higher microbial diversity.
Huh.
And what this paper by Sion Ma was saying, et al., sorry, let's not exclude the et al., is that in kids that are raised in a high pollution environment, inner city environment, they have higher lung diversity. Now, they sampled 621 kids twice, so at birth and at 2 years. Well, near birth and at 2 years. And they found that, it gets worse between those two measurements. What they haven't done is do a long-term thing. Clearly, the whole point of this podcast is to look at long-term effects, but we know from a wide range of other studies that damaging the microbiome in the lungs early makes you much more reactive and likely to react to things like allergens, which will come up later in this episode, dear listener. Anyway, worse air quality, higher diversity in the lungs, more reactive lung. What did you hear about at the AAI?
So the paper I looked at this week looked at baby skin. We want the skin to keep bad stuff out and good stuff in. The way that the body achieves this is that it has a very, very clever barrier. Greg, how would you describe the skin barrier?
Absolute genius. I would say that it is, it's old-fashioned chainmail with armor plating. So you've got this flexible, waterproof mortar, which is made of ceramides and waxes and oils and stuff, in between and kind of sticking together these great big protein plates called squamoucytes, which are very flat, very dead skin cells. They are loaded with keratin. They are tough as old boots because old boots are made of leather and this is made of whatever. They are exactly as tough as old boots. And it flakes off to maintain its thinness and suppleness, and regenerates from underneath, so there's always a fresh, brand new waterproof layer coming up. It's absolute genius.
Yeah, that is the skin barrier. And this is exactly what the researchers were measuring. They were looking at how well the barrier did its function. And it's very hard to measure how much bad stuff is going in through the skin barrier, but it's much easier to measure how much good stuff is going out. So in this case, the good stuff is water vapour, and it's coming out basically from the inside of the body, from the blood, etc. And so the researchers were looking at how much water vapour was coming across the skin. And they asked the parents how often they were washing the babies. Some of them were washed every day, some were washed much less frequently. And what they found was that in young babies, if the babies were washed every day, there was a lot more water vapour coming out through the skin, which indicated that their skin barrier was damaged, and quite significantly damaged. But by the time those babies were 12 months old and older, actually there wasn't a difference. So it didn't seem to matter how often the parents were washing them, the baby's skin function seemed basically the same.
It's interesting. It's very interesting. I mean, there's a lot of things that happen to very young babies that really depend on the skin function. Eczema is one of them. You don't worry as much if a baby's not shown eczema by a year that it's about to, whereas a baby at 4 months could throw eczema any second, right? And messing around with its skin barrier in a way that increases the water coming out by a third is not something you want to do.
Yeah, it's something that we've seen very frequently in papers looking at child development. People have said, it's okay, if this thing only happens for a short period and then it seems fine, well, that means that in the end, it's all fine. But that's not quite how development works. There are very key points where you want to make sure that things do happen or things don't happen, because it sets the body up to grow properly. So should we start by talking about eczema, Greg? Because that's really the kind of stepping stone that most babies go through when they're developing allergy, right?
Yeah, okay. If we're going to lead off that paper straight into allergy, which we absolutely should, it's a perfect segue. let's talk about eczema. So if we're starting by talking about eczema, we should, as you said, look at what eczema is. It's a symptomatic name for red, inflamed, itchy, flaky, scaly skin that often shows up in very early childhood, and most of it is atopic, right? So it is triggered by a specific trigger. I'm not going to say an allergen just at this point because of what we're about to come into. For years, people thought it was allergically driven. So you became allergic to something, that something got near you, it affected your skin, you had an immune reaction in your skin, and then you scratched. It turns out that it's probably more causal than symptomatic of allergy. Some papers since 2021 have all had the same central argument about eczema, which is it happens before you get that big spike in allergic antibodies. It might be, in fact, it looks quite probable that it is, a way for those antigens to get into the body. And what you were just talking about with damaged skin barrier, if you're getting antigens into the body that it is not expecting, in a route that it's not expecting, like through damaged skin, your body's really quite likely to go, I don't know what this is. This whole area is inflamed. I don't like it. I assume that whatever this weird stuff is, it's causing it. So I'm going to become immune to this. And as soon as you're immune to something that is not doing you any damage, you are allergic, right? That's the definition of allergy, is being immune to an otherwise innocuous substance.
It sounds a bit like you're describing a vaccine, Greg.
Yes, exactly the same game. There are three parts to a vaccine. You've got a delivery system that gets the rest of the vaccine into the body.
So over the skin barrier.
Yeah, sure. Normally you'd use a needle.
Yeah.
There are other delivery mechanisms are available, but traditionally it's been a needle. Then you'd have an adjuvant. That's something that irritates the immune system. I nearly swore, but I realised there might be children listening. There shouldn't be children listening. This is not a children's show. It's far too boring. Anyway, an adjuvant very often is broken up bits of old bacteria. Something called LPS is sometimes used, which is a fragment from the outside of a bacterium. And it just irritates the immune system and makes it go, I don't know what's causing this, but when I find out, I'm going to kill it. And then you chuck in the thing you want to be immune to. Normally a little chunk of a virus or a very weakened live virus. The body gets irritated as all hell, finds the thing, goes, I knew it was you, and then remembers that this thing is linked to irritation, and therefore when you see it, you kill it. Those are very simple words for breeding up plasma cells and forming memory cells and the T cell and immunoglobulin reactions. But in effect, it gets annoyed, it finds a thing, it blames the thing, and it remembers the thing. You are now immune to that thing. You are right that eczema actually sounds a lot like that. You have broken up skin barrier. Stuff that shouldn't be getting into the body is getting into the body, so there's your delivery system. That stuff very often includes bits of external bacteria, especially if you're putting soap on the skin, that pulls bacteria into tiny little pieces. It punctures their membranes and they fall apart. So little bits of bacteria going into the body through the cracks that have happened because the skin barrier is damaged. That's your adjuvant. That's really irritating the tissue underneath, which is a vicious cycle there. You irritate the tissue, the skin cells don't fill with their magical armor protein, keratin, quite as well. They crack, they fracture, they let water through, as we saw in that paper. And then something else gets in. And that something else could be anything. But there are some things that are more common. The immune system pays more attention to some things than others. And things like grass pollen or food antigen, peanut antigen, for example, gets into your body. Your immune system's already tramping around in its big boots going, what's causing this? And it grabs your peanut antigen by the lapels and goes, you! I knew it was you! And for the rest of your life, it remembers that peanut antigen has caused all this irritation, and therefore if you see peanut antigen, you absolutely need to kill it immediately. So you're now immune to peanut. And if you're immune to peanut, that means you're allergic to peanut. There you go. How's that for a description of how eczema might lead to allergy?
Oh, that's absolutely fascinating. I think what I'm hearing then is that the very first thing that seems to go wrong is some problem in the skin barrier. We're talking about eczema at this point in early life. And then what does that look like as a kid grows older? I'm just thinking, Greg, I was a classic allergic kid. I had really bad eczema. I remember itching the backs of my knees and my elbows. Still think about that very, very vividly now. Then I had a fish allergy and my lips used to swell up when I was about 5, but that went away. Then I got really bad sneezing, and I'm actually a veterinary surgeon, but I was hella allergic to basically every animal that you can think about. And then I ended up getting asthma. So I feel like there's a lot going on there. I know not everyone has exactly the same experience, but why does this happen? Is this a sort of common path for allergy?
Oh, let's address the big thing first. I didn't know you were allergic to fish.
For about 3 years when I was 5. It took me a while to get over the aversion of putting fish in my mouth, but actually, quite a fish fan now.
I did not know that you had a period when you couldn't eat fish. That is fascinating. You learn something new about your wife every day. Anyway, right, yeah, so how this changes with age is really interesting. If you look at a big group of kids, a lot of them will do a thing called the atopic march, which is a very grandiose name for their symptoms change. They start with a kind of broken looking skin, quite flaky, quite cracked. They then go red and itchy and painful, which is the eczema that we know and quote unquote love. From there, you start seeing symptoms of food allergy, which can be very scary and can be fatal. Then you've got your kind of wheezy 10-year-old, 12-year-old with asthma. And then you've got the sneezing and the red eyes and the weeping nose. Do your nose weep? The runny nose of a thing called allergic rhinitis, which is kind of a hay fevery setup, but yeah, not fun. Those symptoms of allergic rhinitis continue through adulthood, and if you're very lucky and you get to be an old person, they seem to move into itchy ears and an itchy throat of allergic eosinophilic esophagitis.
I mean, I don't know who you're calling old, but I've had itchy ears and throat since I was certainly an adolescent.
I'm calling you old. Right? I'm calling old. No, I mean, you are going to see those symptoms in people above 15,
okay.
And they'll get worse at 50-ish. A very common allergic symptom in the elderly.
Fascinating.
But the interesting thing about the atopic march is that not everybody does it. In fact, most people don't do all the pieces. It's just a group. So it's a group phenomenon. You will see those symptoms in the group. Individual people don't do all the pieces.
Okay, so I'm hearing then, we've got this progression. We've got the fact that it's absurdly common. It's like at least 1 in 5 people, I think, have allergies. Hay fever is crazy common. Food allergies, we're all thinking about making sure that, we don't have peanuts in schools. And allergy is such a top of mind topic.
That's a phenomenally bad idea, by the way.
Not having peanuts.
Such a bad plan.
Why?
Okay, again, it's the difference between group and individuality, isn't it? If you have a kid in a school who is allergic to peanut, it is a great idea for them to not have peanut.
Naturally.
Fine. But what it does to everybody else is make them much more likely to become allergic to peanuts. So you've got a thing called desensitization or tolerance. Let's go back to the irritated immune system stamping around in its big boots, right? Mm-hmm. And it comes across a thing and it doesn't know what the thing is and it goes, you caused this, I hate you. Thing is, if it comes across a thing and it does know what the thing is, it goes, you. Oh, it's you. Oh, I'm sorry, I'll find somebody else. And it goes off to try and find something else. And that is a a slightly anthropomorphic way of saying that if you have these substances presented to you when you are young enough to file them away properly, before you've had a chance to get allergic to them, after you've had a chance for the system to start working, which it starts pretty young, first month and a half of life, then it will remember substances that are non-dangerous. The things you eat that don't cause you illness, it will file away as don't worry about these things. The process by which it does that is really cool. It finds all of the immune cells that react to them and kills them. It's brutal. It runs a fresh set of dietary chemicals over your waiting population of immune stem cells, and anything that reacts gets killed. By the time you are a few months old, by the time you start approaching actual food, you've already lost over half of your immune cells to this process, or at least you should have done. And if you haven't, it makes it much more likely that when these things start coming in through a broken barrier, you're going to throw a reaction to them. So if you rub peanut oil on a bunch of kids who have been eating peanuts because they're allowed peanuts in nursery or whatever, they are not going to become allergic to peanuts. But if you rub peanut oil on a bunch of kids who haven't been allowed to eat peanuts, they are much more likely to become allergic. There is a great example out of a really old Israeli study on on kids who had been allowed to have peanuts in Israel.
It's an early weaning food, isn't it?
It is an early weaning food, exactly. It's a
this.
traditional early weaning food in many cultures in the Middle East. And if you compare them age for age, and you match for amount of money, amount of time spent indoors versus outdoors, other foods, amount of time breastfed or bottle fed, if you match them with families from the UK who are not given peanuts early because of our guidelines, and then you look at who becomes allergic, they don't.
I mean, you said here, imagine rubbing peanut oil on kids' skin, but surely no one would be that stupid. Who
Nobody.
puts peanuts on a baby?
Yes. Right. This is going to sound a bit like I'm quoting from the film Dune, or the book Dune, if you're a man of culture. Arachis oil is a well-known carrier oil for cosmetic and moisturizer components. It was part of 50% of baby-directed skin products back in the late 90s.
Literally peanut oil.
Arachis oil is peanut oil, yeah.
What?
They put one of the most allergenic substances in the world in moisturizers. And yeah, nobody actually did the study at the time because nobody knew what was about to happen. But if anybody had been watching when the enormous spike of, oh my God, now we're all allergic to peanuts happened, I would have been very interested to see what caused that.
But you put moisturiser on damaged skin.
Yeah.
So these kids have got eczema, and then you're putting the... Oh,
yeah, nice,
no.
nice delivery system, nice irritated skin, pissed off immune system, rub in some peanut allergens, and boom, peanut vaccine.
Wow. Mind blown. Okay,
Yeah, but hang on.
Yeah.
Arachis oil was also in products in Israel. This is what I'm saying. So the fact that they had been eating peanuts from an early age means that you could cover them in peanut and they still didn't become peanut allergic. Is that because they had been eating peanuts as early babies? Well, nobody's done the study, but probably.
Well, look, I want to talk about skin barrier because we've talked about all of the kind of what happens and then what happens and then what happens and then what happens. I want to go back right to the beginning, but before we get off this topic, I just want to say in the UK, we're told not to introduce solid foods to our babies until 6 months of age. And that's because the government wants to make sure that we're breastfeeding our babies as much as possible. So they delay the onset of solid food to try and make sure that babies are breastfed as long as they can be. But in some countries, Australia especially, they've moved forward the age for introducing solid foods until 4 months of age because it's so important to get allergens into the baby, even in tiny quantities early on. So if you're listening and you've got a baby and you're thinking, when should I be introducing allergens? Greg, what would you say?
what would I say? I would say that if you are the sort of person who looks guidelines in the face and laughs, going a little bit earlier, something like the Australian guideline of 4 months, is very likely to reduce the risk of allergy. We certainly introduced earlier than those 6 months, and we have no food allergies. But would we have anyway? Who knows?
Who knows?
That's not how science works.
Yep. Okay, can we just take a step back then, Greg? Because we've talked about eczema, how it sets up. So what is it that we're doing unconsciously that is setting our babies up for skin barrier damage and eczema in the first place?
It's an interesting question. The unconsciously part is very interesting because we do somewhat sleepwalk into it. Even though the actions themselves, the putting baby in the bath and having bubble bath, the use of baby shampoo and the use of moisturizers and stuff, they're all very conscious actions. You don't do them by accident. But they're also not things you really think about. They're not choices you make. It's just what people do. Anything that damages the skin barrier, and you said earlier that study had found that washing babies daily takes 1/3 off their waterproofness. Mm-hmm. And waterproofness is a great proxy for how well things can get through the barrier. Anything that we do that gets in the way of the barrier is a terrible move. So, baby bath time, really, really fun, really bubbly. They love it. Great part of the sleep routine. Probably increasing the risk of allergens, of allergies. Things like potentially use of emulsifiers in food. So we're all really familiar with thinking about this barrier on the outside of the body. You have almost the same barrier around your gut. And if you start punching little holes in that with detergent, or as it's called in food, emulsifier, then you get exactly the same thing. You get trashed little pieces of bacteria going through the barrier, pissing off the immune system, and then you get a little bit of whatever you were eating goes through with it. You get a similar effect in the lungs if you've got particulate pollution. So if you're near people who are idling their cars, punching little holes in your lung membranes and then letting some of that lovely lung microbiome that I was talking about, oh my word, what a callback, letting that through into your now irritated tissue is a great way to get allergies there, to inhaled allergens such as grass pollen or other things that give you hay fever. I mean, where else? Gwen, where else are you thinking of?
I'm thinking of what we do to babies' bottoms, Greg.
Oh,
yeah.
Horrible. Yeah, but no, you're absolutely right. That is the worst. Tell us more.
We think about eczema, and when we think about eczema, we talk about red skin that is not really confined to the nappy area, because when we have problems in the nappy area, we call it nappy rash or diaper dermatitis. But fundamentally, it's exactly the same problem, right? We've got a skin barrier that's really damaged. In this case, because skin's not meant to be wrapped in a plastic bag with wee and poo all over it. And
really?
We can talk about that in another episode. I'm so keen to talk about how other cultures deal with babies toileting. But yes, so we have skin barrier damaged in that area. And as soon as there's poo on that skin, you've then got this kind of sludge that has not only loads and loads of bacteria in, but also loads of things called bile acids, which is what the body uses to chomp up fats in the digestive tract. Those go munching away at the skin barrier. We've got a pH difference. That means that the skin can't function properly. And then the whole area is plastered with food allergens. So nappy rash is another big way that allergens can get into a baby's body.
We've used the word allergen a lot, and we've used the word antigen a lot. Do you want me to tell everyone listening what the difference is?
Yeah, good point.
I raised this. I know you all know anyway. Don't worry. But I didn't know until not so long ago, so I'm going to say it. Haha. Antigen is a little piece of whatever you like that can be picked up by the immune system and examined. That's it. They get picked up by these things called antigen presenting cells and shown to T cells, but it's just stuff that the immune system picks up. Allergen is what we call an antigen that you're allergic to. So if the immune system picks the thing up and goes, not this, that's an antigen. If the immune system picks up a thing and goes, this, I hate this, That is an antigen that is viewed as an allergen. And an allergen is the bits of stuff that you are allergic to.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, we've talked about allergy and the long-term consequences. We've talked about the skin barrier. So the other big part of this puzzle that we haven't talked about yet, Greg, is the microbiome. And the microbiome works very closely with the skin to help create this barrier between the body and the outside world. And what happens when the microbiome is disrupted is that the skin doesn't work so well, and some of the microbes on the skin are even more angry. The body reacts even more strongly against them. And so this we can immediately see can cause a problem. If the microbiome isn't as it should be, then the skin barrier doesn't work as well. And if the microbes get into the body, they cause much more of a reaction. Okay, so what do we do accidentally that disrupts the microbiome in kids? Well, the first one probably is how they're born. Why is that so important? It's about colonizers. When a baby is born, they have virtually, arguably, no microbes on their guts, on their skin. I know. I'm sure it will be discovered that there are microbes on this, what we think is a nice, sterile, virgin little baby.
There's no such thing.
But when the first microbes that move into an area have a massive advantage because they can take advantage of the resources, they can go exactly where they want to go, and then every next microbe that comes in has to work around the ones that are already there, which means that early colonization period is absolutely critical, because when you get the right microbes there, all of the next ones stack up as they're meant to. If those early colonizers are wrong, they shape their environment so it's not quite right for the next bacteria. They outcompete, or they take up space that should be occupied by other species. And generally they make it hard to establish the microbiome that the body needs for good health. And so therefore, how a baby is born is one of the biggest factors affecting their microbiome. So sure, we can think about surgical birth, so cesarean section versus a vaginal birth. During a vaginal birth, the baby goes through the vagina, but even more importantly, through the vulva. And actually, I didn't know this, I only learned it fairly recently. The vaginal microbiome and the vulvar microbiome are actually really different. But the baby goes through the vagina, through the vulvar microbiome, which has a microbiome much more like a fecal microbiome, and then the baby gets all of those good bacteria on its face and its nose and its mouth, and then it is then picked up to be cuddled, but it's already been coated in the bacteria it needs. If a baby is born by C-section, however, the first bacteria that baby encounters are skin bacteria, are the bacteria of a hospital environment, and it means that those first ones are not the ones the body's expecting. But it even goes beyond that, actually, because I mentioned the microbes that you find in a hospital setting. Those are actually very different from the environment in which the child will grow up in. And what we really want to do is we want to give the baby the microbes that it needs to survive and thrive in its home environment. And that's why there's also a difference depending on whether a baby is born at home or in hospital. When we are setting that baby's microbiome up for success, that very first point is really important for the long-term growth and development of the microbiome. There's one other piece, though, that often is part of birth, is definitely not a chosen or deliberate one, but it's an exposure that many babies have, and that is that many births have antibiotics given either to the mother or to the baby. If they're given to the mother, They can cross into the baby's bloodstream. If the baby's still inside, they cross in the umbilical cord. If the baby's on the outside and the mother's breastfeeding, those antibiotics go through the breast milk. And what happens is that those antibiotics kill some of the baby's microbes. There will always be a few microbes of different species that can survive, and so those microbes gain a massive advantage, but many other species die. And so early life antibiotics have a much, much greater effect on the baby in those first days, weeks and months than in the first, 2 to 3 years, for example. Greg, talked about birth, I've talked about antibiotics. Anything I've missed in those?
The only thing I think we haven't talked about is breastfeeding and the fact that that microbiome you're talking about inside the baby's gut that you've worked so hard to set up is continually monitored and maybe not monitored, but administered, tended by breast milk, which is fascinating. So your mum's there gathering information about antigens, bacteria, viruses, whatever's out in the outside world, processing that in the great big computer of her immune system, and outputting exactly the chemicals that are required to tune the baby's microbiome such that it is strong enough to handle all of that random stuff, which I think is really, really important. And what I think a lot of people know that breast milk helps with the baby's immune system, blah, 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 blah. Lovely. What never gets said is that this is one of those occasions when it doesn't have to be purely breastfed baby. This isn't about bottle milk being bad, it's about breast milk being good. So if you have a bottle-fed baby who gets a mouthful of breast milk every now and then, that is 1,000,000 times better than a bottle-fed baby who doesn't get a mouthful of breast milk every now and again from that microbiome standpoint. And I think that gets lost in translation. People see two states, breastfeeding or bottle feeding. They don't see, bottle feeding for calories and breastfeeding for immune modulation. They don't see breastfeeding for jaw workout and bottle feeding for protein. So it is worth knowing that there aren't just two options, and that's important around this get your microbiome right so you don't get allergies piece. Mm-hmm. That's the only thing I think we missed.
Yeah, it's a great point. As someone who had mixed fed all of her babies with some formula and some breast milk, I totally relate to that message. But I had a friend recently who told me that she knows when her baby is going to get a cold because her milk gets thick and yellow a couple of days in advance, which is probably cool. Her own immune system responding and cranking stuff up, which is just mind-blowing. I love biology. Okay, shall we wrap this up and talk about what people can do to reduce the risk of allergy in their own kids?
Sounds great. Oh, and by the way, for anybody listening, if you can hear small snufflings and scrapings around, there's a rabbit. There's a rabbit running around. There are two. One of them's a wuss. He's hiding outside. The other one has already tried to bite through one microphone cable and one charging cable during this recording. So I apologise if they're snuffling. And now she's climbing a pile of books. She's an adventurous rabbit.
Okay, so what can we do to reduce the risk of allergy in kids? First, think about what microbes are going into the baby as soon as it's born. So if you have not yet had your baby, think about setting up for a birth that is likely to be low intervention. The best way of doing that is looking at the biological processes that need to happen during birth and setting up your environment in a way that makes them likely to happen. Second, do everything you can to avoid taking antibiotics during pregnancy and birth and in the first few weeks. Obviously, if you or the baby are sick and need antibiotics, that is a very important exception. But if you're told to take antibiotics by your healthcare provider, always ask some extra questions. Ask, is this because there is an infection or because I'm at risk of an infection? Do some reading, look at a few decision analysis tools and decide whether or not you think that taking antibiotics is justified. Because although the short-term benefit can be great, the long-term consequences can be really very bad. So, antibiotics and birth. Also, breastfeeding. As a vet, I thought it would happen. Boy, was I wrong. Didn't happen easily at all, but I was very lucky to have the support of amazing women who helped me to breastfeed as much as I possibly could. So, do everything you can to set up breastfeeding that works, including by talking to people who are able to help. 3. Remember that earlier exposure to allergens seems to reduce the risk of developing allergies later. So think peanut, shellfish, milk, egg. Whenever you decide to introduce these foods, just make sure they are as early as you think is reasonable, and certainly no earlier than about 4 months. But small quantities are protective. Washing. What are your recommendations on washing babies?
I think it's hilarious. Maybe once so you can get photos and then never again. Don't wash a baby unless it's actually dirty. There's no need. They smell nice even if you don't wash them. And I know a lot of people wash them because they have like cradle cap and things, but you can remove cradle cap even more effectively with coconut oil, and that doesn't trash the microbiome.
Fantastic. Avoid moisturisers on babies. They're not protective against eczema. In fact, they increase the risk of allergies, referenced below. And do what you can to avoid nappy rash and diaper rash. If you haven't done it already, look up elimination communication as a way to help babies never get poo on their skin in the first place, which is the most effective way to prevent nappy rash. Greg, have I missed anything else?
Yeah, big one.
Go for it.
Vaccines.
Oh, yeah.
So I realised I was just using the idea of a vaccine or the mechanism of a vaccine to explain allergies. That does not mean that I think vaccines are a bad thing, right? If you get your child properly vaccinated, they are much less likely to end up in hospital on all sorts of antibiotics and recovering either from the original insult or secondary infections. And if that doesn't happen, they are much more likely to have a healthy microbiome and stay away from allergies. So yeah, go get your MMR.
Fantastic. Right, I think that's the end of our allergy special, Greg. What should we...
That was very special. Oh my God, that was hard work. I think allergies are a weird one, right? We work for clients who are at I think it's fair to say, probably the best in the world at trying to treat or prevent allergy in kids. And we get to teach them what's changing and what's new in the science here, which is a privilege. But then we come back to being parents, and it's so hard to not just do what our culture tells us to do. Following the science here is really difficult, but has this huge payoff where you don't get allergies. You don't spend your life snuffling or afraid to go near a cat. I'm always afraid to go near a cat, and I'm not allergic. I just think they're bitey little gits. Lovely, adorable, bitey little gits. So yeah, no, allergies it's hard work, and it was a good episode. Do you want to answer a reader question?
Yeah, let's go for it.
I have a range. We have like 15 left over from last week, so thank you. There's one which stood out for me, which was from a soon-to-be parent saying, I don't want my kid to be afraid of things. And their question is, are irrational fears nature or nurture?
Ooh, what a great question.
Yeah. Do you mind if I have a shot at this one?
No, go for it.
So we know that you cannot make, or it's very difficult to make monkeys afraid of flowers.
Yeah.
There was the study done on can you make monkeys afraid of flowers? They give them electric shocks when they showed them flowers. I thought it was very mean, but you still don't get a monkey that's afraid of flowers. However, it's really easy to make a monkey afraid of the shape of a hawk or spiders
Yeah.
or snakes.
Yeah.
anything long and snake-like, anything with multiple jointed legs, anything that has wings at the front and a long tail at the back. Interestingly, if you move the shape of a hawk backwards, they're not scared of it. It's only if it's moving forwards. I assume if it's moving backwards, it looks like a duck. Whatever. So there are...
Terrifying ducks.
A terrifying duck. The terror ducks of your... Anyway, I feel like there was a film, The Mighty Ducks. Anyway, so there are certain things that it is in our nature, assuming we're like monkeys, because we are, it is in our nature to be more easily terrified of certain things, yeah?
Yeah.
But do you think it would be fair to say that that's nature, because it still requires some trigger to become allergic, to become phobic of them? So is that nature or nurture?
Oh. I don't think you can be genetically scared of a thing, right?
Don't know. I'm scared of loud noises. Like this.
I think there's a point where you're exposed to it in a critical period of your development. We used a Hoover analogy, didn't we?
We did use the Hoover analogy.
Which was the difference between how you feel about Hoovers if you meet one when it's being used by a smiling parent in a bright and sunny room, as compared to when it falls out of a cupboard at 2 a.m, knocks its on switch, and then thrashes around in the dark screaming. Those two exposures to exactly the same stimulus can have lifelong different responses.
Yeah, fair. So you're saying if I'd listened to more heavy drum and bass as a child, I wouldn't have my heart-pounding response to very loud noises. I'm curious.
Mostly because you just couldn't hear them.
That's true. I wouldn't actually have eardrums, would I?
True.
So I could blow bubbles out of my ears in the shower. I certainly couldn't use the eardrums though, could I? We should wrap this up. So to answer the question, do we think that phobias are nurture or nature? We think they are both.
Yes.
But we think that they can't be nature unless there's also nurture.
Yes.
But without the nature, the effect of the nurture would be wildly different.
Yes, that's fair.
Right, I'm glad we could clear that up. Clear as mud. You have been listening to Growing Up Weird with Gwen Bradbury and me, Greg Dickens. We will be back next week with a different topic and a different range of questions. Tune in then. Bye.